So now you're
I've
over
been
20
sent
weeks.
home when the fetus was not large enough to do the test at 17 or 18 weeks. So by the time you get the results, you're over your 20-week mark. So whatever the results were, and you were deciding this is not healthy for whatever the results showed you, you can't do anything about it anymore.
Hey, but you know what, and let's just, the other side of the coin is some people will do the test and want the test and then decide, either make accommodations that this is the life I'm going to have. I'm going to have you know what I mean? It's just, it goes back to choice.
A good friend of mine just found out that he's having a Down syndrome child.
Right.
And what they decided is they packed up, they lived in Long Island City, and they packed up and they moved to Virginia so they could have family support.
Exactly.
But they made a choice.
And they had the ability to make the choice.
And they had the ability to choose whether they were going to terminate it or not. No one was holding a gun to their head saying, I'm sorry, it's an arbitrary 20-week period, and now you can't do that. This affects women in their 30s and 40s. And if we talk about women growing up in these day and age, not taking reproductive rights for granted, this is something that should scare the daylights out of anyone.
And let's talk for a minute. Your access to reproductive rights and how they're exercised really has to do with where you live in this country. If you live in a state that Texas recently passed a law that if you're a doctor and you're performing abortions, you have to have visiting rights at a hospital. But hospitals don't give visiting rights, and so they're really they're limiting and limiting and limiting the ability of a woman to make that choice.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But when you think of New York State, people say, "Oh, we're fine here." We're not fine here.
Right.
Since January, 9 bills were introduced to limit our reproductive rights in New York State. After 24 weeks, it's absolutely impossible to find a doctor who will terminate a pregnancy for you because our law was the leading law in the country. 1970, New York went pro-choice, passed a law. Because of the Senate that we now have, that's an anti-choice New York State Senate, we cannot get through. Again, led by a group of Democrats empowering them. So again, it's a nonpartisan issue, but we have this anti-choice Senate that is not allowing us to bring a reproductive health act into the 21st century. We are not incorporating the medical knowledge we have. They talk about, in this last Senate race last year, and when they kept talking about the fact that you could have an abortion at any time under that. That's totally false. By Roe, by Casey, these Supreme Court decisions, if a fetus is born viable, it is the doctor is required to keep it alive. So if I terminate a pregnancy because of my health, because I have cancer, because of any of these things, and the fetus is okay, the fetus will be born. So this was a total misrepresentation.
Yeah. Well, that's what they do. And it's sad that they get away with it with such abandon, and that the media doesn't question them. And let me ask you something. In New York State, you touched upon the New York State Senate. And the cabal that keeps the Republicans in charge there is led by a guy named Klein, and then you have the cabal in Westchester County that keeps the Republicans in power. It's led by a guy named Kaplowitz. How do these guys, who I imagine purport to be pro-choice and pro-women's health, square that circle? I mean, how do they say I really do support this, but then make their bed with people who are just totally against that?
I think there's a common element and there's two different things. We were instrumental in both elections, my organization. When Jeff Klein was running for that seat, we worked very hard to get him elected. WCLA PAC did. And he was a good leader on the issue until it became an issue of his power.
Yeah, exactly.
And he managed to take over the Democratic Party enough in the Bronx. He also managed to make sure that every 10 years when we reconfigure the district lines, he made sure that his district lines had less and less of Westchester because that had less and less of us. Choice matters. And he now sits atop this proud little agreement that he works with the Republican, and that is blessed by our governor.
Yes, it is blessed by our governor.
It's blessed by our governor. And no one likes to talk about that, but it is blessed by our governor.
I got no problem talking about
that. That is why we have not had the Reproductive Health Act passed. And in Westchester, Kaplowitz, I believe it is an issue of power. He's happily sitting there. He's the one who, along with Virginia Perez, who sided with the Republicans to pass this awful, awful budget in 2012. And, people like to say, with time you forget. I don't forget. No. Because that really wounded the people of Westchester.
And it really wounded the most vulnerable people of Westchester. And that's what gets me, is that, they always pick on the people that can least afford, the people that don't have a voice, the people that don't have a way to get other services. And these, especially capitalists, this guy's a Democrat. I mean, what are we for if we're not for that?
If anybody who has ever struggled knows the last thing you think about is voting.
Exactly.
You think about how I'm going to feed my kids. Can I pay my next bill? I'll buy my kid the pants so he looks respectable at work.
Right, but I won't get mine.
But I won't get it. The last thing you're thinking about is voting. And that is what this county executive, and this is what Kaplowitz bet on. They don't have to worry about the people who are struggling because the last thing they're going to do is vote. They're busy trying to stay alive.
And they feel like they're not going to vote for them anyway, so why should I care about them?
Well, you know what? They might because they send out pretty press pieces.
Yeah.
But that's not the last thing anyone's thinking about who's struggling is that.
It just, but to me, if I had to, if my choice in being in public service was to stay in public service, I had to do things to hurt poor people and people who have no defenses, I'd rather not be here. Because it's just, to me, the only saving grace of being a public official is that you could help people who wouldn't have a voice if you weren't there.
But all you have to do is look at the fact that they tried to cut all the funding to food pantries.
Yeah.
Who goes to food pantries?
Exactly.
People who need food.
Yeah.
So
let them pull themselves up by their own bootstraps.
Because they were forced to face the public and face the newspapers over that, they brought it back. The rest of it is baloney.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just really cruel.
Just an aside, I'll just tell you a quick story. It always mattered to me. When I was a kid, I was about 17 or 18. I was visiting my grandmother and spending a couple weeks with her, and she grew up poorer than poor. And she had lived with my aunt at the time, and all she got, this is in the 70s, I think she was getting like $300 a month Social Security. So she would get up, get her check, she'd get a bunch of $10 bills, and she'd stick them in envelopes to a bunch of Catholic charities. So I'm eating breakfast one day, and I said, Nana, why do you do this? Because, it's not like you got a lot. And she looked, and I'll never forget, she looked at me, she said, Tommy, there's always somebody that has it worse than you. And that always stuck with me.
I dressed over 1,000 kids in back-to-school clothes. And what we did is I fought for the working poor, the families who weren't in shelters but were living at home and where you chose between a coat and a Con Ed bill. And when we went to corporations with the profiles, it was always the secretary. It was always the person on the bottom of the financial ladder who did the most for these kids, who bought 3 things instead of 1. That is the problem with this budget, but it's also the problem with gutting the health centers. Yeah. Whether or not you choose to use the birth control, it should be available to you.
Exactly.
That's what our president has fought for.
Exactly. I mean, and that's what choice is all about. If you want to have a child, that should be your choice. And the government, I believe, should foster that choice. I mean, a lot of people who are so against women's reproductive rights don't care about kids once they're born.
Well,
it's. They want to cut, aid to food stamps, aid to everything that helps, especially, single women raise children.
I wrote something recently that compared Congress to County Executive Astorino. Congress went after the health centers and said we weren't going to fund them. And then when it came to Planned Parenthood and wanted to cut all the funding to Planned Parenthood, they said you should go to health centers. Yes. Astorino was just more successful. He cut Planned Parenthood first and then went after the health centers and did it with a budget because nobody's looking at county government. People have very little understanding of how much it impacts their life. They barely realize that state government impacts their lives. So it's very frustrating, but Astorino's been totally successful, and it's time he goes.
He is a very good at presenting a mild demeanor that hides a really right-wing, a right-wing mindset.
He is very.
And unfortunately, in our last election, we didn't bring that out.
He's very likable when you talk to him.
Yes.
He has a very nice social manner. That's what was successful for him on the radio.
So is the devil. That's what they were. I'm sorry, that might be a bit extreme, but you know what I mean.
I don't know. Sometimes I don't think so. In any case, county government plays a big role. I'm curious to see what happened when this airs. We'll know what happened.
Oh, in the election.
In the election,
right.
But
we're taping this before the election. It'll air after the election, just sort of folks following along at home will know.
So I'm curious, but I also am curious for people whether people will take heart and become involved. It's not just the president. Everybody's looking at the presidential debates and thinking that we have a Congress, we have a New York State Senate.
Yeah.
If we took the Senate and made it pro-choice, we could bring reproductive health into the 21st century.
The most damaging thing that's happened politically in this country in the past 20 years is that the Republicans have taken control of the state houses. And since they've taken control of the state houses, they redistrict the congressional district in ways that keep them in power. And it isn't representative of the people's votes. If you look at in aggregate, the number of votes for congressmen, the Democrats always win. But the Republicans take control because they have these districts that are built for them, because they control the state houses. And so the local elections really matter. It matters who you vote for locally, because that person might someday be, a state official who can help in redistricting. You know what? It matters that you vote for people that actually advocate and fight for the stuff that they say they're for.
It's important. I want to stress again, we're nonpartisan. We're always proud when we have people from both parties on our voting guide.
I'm not.
Let me say that the people who joined in that budget vote,
Yes.
we had 3 people who we had considered pro-choice and voted with Andy Spano when he was the county executive. So I don't know what they stand for. They switched over. Astorino took over the 9th floor, and so did all their politics swing to the right. To me, that just says I just want to have a seat here.
I got no core.
They have no core, and they also are solely concerned with being reelected and having money from the 9th floor.
Yeah, well, that's a shame, because like I said before, if it's just about getting reelected, I'd rather go shoot pool or something. You know what I mean? There's other things I like to do in life. But how can people who want to help out, who want to get people elected, who believe in women's reproductive rights, how can they get involved?
Well, I think on the camera it showed our email address.
Yes.
Actually, it showed our website. There is a place on our website that you can fill in information, and we will contact you. Or you can call our number, which is 914-946-5363. Again, 914-946-5363. And we welcome volunteers. Call us. Someone will get back to you. If there's no one in the office at the time, someone will get back to you.
And you're conveniently located in White Plains on Mamaroneck Avenue.
Right across the street from the YMCA.
Why? Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
Now, in the even-numbered year coming up, it's a very important election. Obviously, it's all the your senators, your congressmen, your president. But how involved does your organization get in, like the state senate and the assembly races?
Westchester is the bellwether for the state.
Right.
As goes Westchester, so goes the state. So when you have state offices like we did last year, and you had Eric Schneiderman running for Attorney General, you had DiNapoli running for Comptroller, and Andrew Cuomo for Governor, we were key in the way we went. We were very instrumental in supporting Eric Schneiderman, who was a phenomenal Attorney General. But we play a key role in our local elections, and it's essential. We had a horrible man running against George Lederer, and now twice. We have had very, very close races, and it's very important. We are key in these races.
Right.
Our endorsements matter, our support matters, our database matters more than I can tell you.
Yes, you have an extensive database just for focusing on of voters in the area. Voters in Westchester County.
Over 90,000 individuals in Westchester County.
For whom choice matters.
That will cross party lines to vote.
What we forget sometimes is that the 70s, the 80s, Republicans supported women's reproductive rights.
And in our database, they still do.
Yeah.
You will find
it's amazing how the politics is.
You'll find a lot of conservatives and Republicans in our database, and that's really where it, I want to say where it matters, choice matters, because that's who's going to change if you're running for office. You're going to, as a Democrat, you're going to count that certain Democrats are going to automatically vote for you. And then there are the nons who haven't ascribed to a party. And then there are the independents who didn't know that they were actually subscribing to a party. And then you have the Republicans and the conservatives, and now they added all the extra parties, but who knows. But those people are in our database, and they will vote for the candidate who's pro-choice.
Okay. Catherine, thank you very much for coming tonight. It's really nice to have a spirited guest and a great conversation. Thank you, and tune in next time for The Tom Murphy Show.